Historians of Reddit, what is the strangest chain of events you have studied? We learnt about this at school. In the 1950s in Borneo they were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so, with the help of the World Health Organization, they sprayed DDT all over the island to kill the mosquitoes. But the DDT also killed the island's wasps, which helped control the population of thatch-eating caterpillars, thatch that people's homes were made of, and thanks to this, their roofs began to collapse. Many other small insects started to get affected by the DDT, which were eaten by geckos. The geckos developed a tolerance to the DDT, but the cats who ate the geckos didn't, and the cat population started to die off. This led to the island's rat population to increase greatly. And that's the story of how an island with a malaria problem led to cats being airdropped into Borneo. Skinner, well, I was wrong. The lizards are a godsend. Lisa, but isn't that a bit short-sighted? What happens when we are overrun by lizards? Skinner, no problem. We simply unleash wave after wave of Chinese needle snakes. They'll wipe out the lizards. Lisa, but aren't the snakes even worse? Skinner, yes, but we are prepared for that. We've lined up a fabulous type of gorilla that thrives on snake meat. Lisa, but then we are stuck with gorillas. Skinner, no, that's the beautiful part. When wintertime rolls around, the gorillas simply freeze to death. You beat me to it. That scene was based off of something similar, if I recall from the audio commentary of the episode. There's a hole in my bucket, dear Lisa. Well, fix it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. President Andrew Jackson was walking out of the Capitol building with his buddy Congressman Davy Crockett. A man approached them, drew a gun, but it misfired. The man drew a second gun, which also misfired. Andrew Jackson, fairly old at this point, lifted his cane and began beating the would-be assassin. Normally, people would react with justice served, but Jackson was beating him so badly that Davy Crockett had to pull Jackson off his would-be assassin, who was arrested shortly after. The would-be assassin stood trial, represented by lawyer Francis Scott Key, author of the Star-Spangled Banner, and was the first American to be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Crockett was in the House, not the Senate. Francis Scott Key had a son named Philip Barton Key. Philip was murdered by Daniel Sickles. Daniel Sickles used the first temporary insanity plea in the United States and he was acquitted of all charges. Ironic that Francis Key defended Richard Lawrence and used the insanity plea. Then Francis Key's son is killed by Daniel Sickles, who used the first temporary insanity plea. Daniel Sickles' leg was later shattered during the Battle of Gettysburg, where he either almost cost the Union Army the Civil War by ignoring orders, or blundered his way into winning the battle by blunting Lee's advance. After his shattered leg, bones are now on display at the National Museum of Health and Medicine. I do remember learning about him visiting his leg that he donated to the museum. Being an amateur Civil War geek, it feels a little of column A, a little of column B on that one. A Chinese man wanted to create a potion to become immortal. Instead, he accidentally created gunpowder. That wasn't just one guy. That was basically driven by the royal court of China at the time. And I think that's the same emperor that is buried with the Sea of Mercury. Different emperor, I think. Qin Shi Huang was the one buried with all the mercury, and he died in 210 BC, about 1000 years before the invention of gunpowder. Qin Shi Huang also tried to become immortal once. He drank a bunch of mercury, and then he died. It's crazy that so many people thought mercury was the key to living forever. To be fair, mercury is some wild shit. If I DK anything about metallurgy and saw this liquid metal that does a bunch of cool stuff, I'd think maybe it could give me superpowers or something. Mercury literally makes no sense if you have no idea what it is. Duh, he's the Roman version of Hermes. What's the problem? So, the Han heard the Qin were fond of mega projects and massive infrastructure investments, so they found a hydraulics engineer and sent him over to sell them on an absurd canal idea. Build a massive canal to use runoff water from two flood-prone rivers to irrigate worthless plains. Tame the river's flooding, irrigate wasteland, everybody wins. And in the Han's schemes, it's an absurdly large project that will keep the Qin diverted and invested for decades. And it does. except about halfway through, the kin cotton onto this and confront their hydraulics engineer, Zengao, presumably confronted with whatever creative thing or things they do to spies and saboteurs, throws himself on kin mercy. Yeah, I'm a spy. Yeah, it was to sabotage your efforts, but I'm really an engineer, guys, and this will really work, honest. Let me finish it, and please don't do that thing with the cheese grater. The kin, presumably, conclude they can always torture him to death later and let him remain in charge of the project. And wonder of wonders, it works. Thousands of hectares or rich but fallow desert are turned into fertile farmland. Existing farmland is made safer by giving the flooding rivers runoff channels. The canal makes the kin rich beyond their already immense wealth, which they turn to larger armies, eventually crushing the Han and, briefly, uniting China. What happened to the engineer? Nobody cares about engineers once they've made things work. Source: I'm engineer. Nobody cared who I was until I put on the OSHA complaint mask. Compliant or complaint? Both. This is an older BBC series called Connections, with James Burke hosting, and it is incredibly fascinating. You can watch most of the episodes on YouTube. It's kind of what you're asking about, chains of events throughout history. From the Normans' horse stirrups to mine shafts to vacuums to telecommunications, all connected. I highly recommend anyone give this a try. Connections is the best show I've ever seen that combined history and science, and explained why things are the way they are in contemporary terms. I can't upvote any reference to this show enough. It's the histories of invention. What problem were they trying to solve? What were the solutions in their histories? Which one? And what was the effect? Me too. I enjoyed the show so much I bought the DVD sets, Connections and Connections Second. I could stop you right there. Pretty much the fall of the Berlin Wall. The USSR was already crumbling by this point, and so they agreed to allow the wall to be opened for a bit. Well, the guy in charge over in Berlin didn't really get the point across to the public very well, and as a result everyone assumed that the wall was permanently coming down. This led to pretty much all of East Berlin flocking to the wall and demanding to be let through. The guards there knew there was no way to restrain all these people without a massacre occurring, and the Russian government had no real way of easily fixing the huge mistake. And so the Berlin Wall fell, all because of misinterpretation. One of my earliest memories watching it being pulled apart and people celebrating, and random David Hasselhoff. Is this why David Hasselhoff is loved by all Germans? He was loved long before that. Absolutely. I lived in Germany in the 80s. One of the big stores we used to go to had a small music section with 3 racks of records. One of the racks was entirely Hasselhoff. Fully 1/3 of the records in this store. We are always making fun of it, like we do with retirement homes. Nearly every one of those has a fake bus station in front of it. Why? Because the old people sometimes want to get home, so they leave the retirement home and start walking and wait at the bus station for a bus that will never come. So they wait patiently until the employee came and picked them up. Same with David. He said I brought down that wall, and we Germans were like whatever, as long as it was gone. I don't care who gets credit. And in my opinion, Michael Knight, Knight Rider tore down the wall by singing sounds a lot cooler than everyone misinterpreted what was said by their government. British officers in India in the 18th century were eating quinine powder to help treat malaria. Quinine is so bitter on its own, so they started putting it in their club soda to make easier to down. They invented tonic water, brought the water back to Europe, and they started putting it in their gin. Hence, gin and tonic. This goes a little further. The use of tonic water spread throughout the empire as an anti-malarial. The gin was added to make the tonic both more tasty and also because Victorians drank like cray cray. The takeaway is, the gin is the mixer. The tonic is a deliverable substance being diluted. Now there's a switch from every other cocktail. This actually answers a lot of questions. I have always found tonic water bafflingly gross. Finally, another of us. There's a distillery near me that makes their own though, and it's heavenly. Nothing like what people usually think of. So if you see a cocktail bar that made their own, give it a try. Fever Tree Tonic and Hendrick's Gin is heavenly. Just absolutely delicious. Is Fever Tree like a traditional tonic in flavor? Not really huge on the typical G&T, either due to preference or being a neophyte. Fever Tree in general has a great reputation. Fever Tree makes a few different varieties of tonic, so you can be sure to find one to suit your taste. Some are more botanical and less bitter. I think there's 4 or so. Horses evolved in North America, spread during prehistorical times into Asia, and then later went extinct in North America. If things had been only slightly different, horses could have been native only to the Americas, or just completely extinct by prehistory. Not having horses would have made a huge difference to Asian and European history. No Mongol invasions, no European knights, no Indo-Europeans either. Basically around 5,000 years ago, the Indo-Europeans domesticated the horse and conquered all of Europe. If they wouldn't have done that, it's not certain the Bronze Age would have started, and so on and so on. Practically all of Europe, the Middle East and India carry their genes to this day. They were the Aryans Hitler liked so much. They are never gonna stop. From Paris down to Turkey, we've won the f***ing lot. Bob Paisley and Bill Shankly, the fields of Anfield Road. We are loyal supporters.